Hello, I'm Czardus, and this is the Chicago History Project, where we are telling the story of Chicago through Cities Skylines. In today's video, we are going to discuss events leading up to the War of 1812, the city's first murder, and ultimately, the Battle of Fort Dearborn. So stay tuned and go ahead and hit that like button. It's a free way to help push this video out to a wider audience. We begin with the story of John Kinsey, long considered one of Chicago's founding fathers. In 1804, Kinsey moved to town, purchasing the home that had been DuSaple's from Lalim. Kinsey was an all-around capitalist slaveholder who sought profit at every opportunity and often cheated his friends and family members. He quickly established his own trading post in conjunction with Thomas Forsyth, his half-brother and business partner, and eventually secured a deal to be the official sutler of the fort, meaning the soldiers were required to purchase any goods they needed from him. You'll recall from last week that Jean Lalim served as an interpreter for the fort and worked very closely with the operators of the factory, the U.S.-sponsored trading post, such as Matthew Irwin. Over the years, two factions developed at the settlement. One was led by Kinsey, the other led by Lalim and Irwin. Kinsey sought profit first, while Lalim and Irwin were more interested in developing better relationships with the Potawatomi, especially because they received a salary regardless of how the factory did. Kinsey could sell alcohol, but Irwin couldn't because the government forbade it. And also importantly, Lalim and Irwin were very loyal to the U.S. After all, they were U.S. employees, while Kinsey had some very deep ties to the British and even illegally sold to the British despite an embargo in 1807. During this period, the U.S. government was working hard to aggressively convince the Native American tribes in the Northwest Territories to sign treaties ceding land to the U.S. for settlement. William Henry Harrison, who ultimately would become known to history as the president who served the shortest term when he died of typhoid only 1 month into his term, leading to John Tyler becoming president, who somehow still has a living grandson 180 years after his presidency. Wait, where was I? William Henry Harrison was serving as the governor of Indiana Territory, which included Chicago. Having previously served in the military during the Northwest Indian War, Harrison perhaps was predisposed to taking aggressive steps against Native Americans. Meanwhile, Potawatomi chief Maine-Poc, considered by many of his peers to be the greatest warrior in the West, opposed American expansion, inviting Tenskwatawa and his brother Tecumseh to settle with the Potawatomis in Tippecanoe after the Americans had claimed their lands in Ohio. Tenskwatawa was considered the Shawnee prophet, teaching his followers to shun European and American customs, abandon the fur trade, and end the ceding of land to the American conquistors. Together, Maine-Poc and Tenskwatawa's justifiable growing animosity towards the American settlers made many Americans nervous. By 1808, the situation had deteriorated to the point where William Wells, the U.S. agent serving at Fort Wayne, brought a delegation including Maine-Poc to Washington to meet President Jefferson. Wells, who had worked hard to build trust with the Potawatomis, hoped that the visit would be fruitful in promoting peace, but ultimately Jefferson and the rest of the Americans failed to understand Maine-Poc's position, trying to persuade him to live a lifestyle they saw suitable, rather than trying to recognize the lifestyle he wanted to live. Maine-Poc returned home with the understanding that the Americans wanted to end his people's way of life. Meanwhile, back in Indiana, Governor Harrison was pushing for more land treaties, and William Wells had been fired from his position at Fort Wayne, which caused a further rift with the Potawatomis. The resulting treaty, negotiated in 1809, created even more animosity among the Native Americans, sending more followers to Maine-Poc and Tenskwatawa. In May 1810, Captain Nathan Heald replaced Captain Whistler as commander at Fort Dearborn. Heald had previously served at Fort Wayne, where he had been courting William Wells's niece, Rebecca. Whistler had been a bit corrupt in his running of Fort Dearborn, making significant profits for his own family, and Factor Matthew Irwin had exposed the corruption, so the U.S. government transferred Whistler to Detroit instead. In addition, Charles Jewett, who had been serving as the Indian agent, was moving away after he and his wife had lost a child. On top of that, the Illinois Territory had recently been separated from the Indiana Territory, leading to some confusion even in Washington about whether Chicago was in Indiana or Illinois. It seemed like the middle of nowhere to many, including Captain Heald, who hated it so much that he took a 9-month-long vacation to New England, returning in 1811, having married Rebecca Wells on the return trip. Relations between the Americans and Mainpaw, Tenskwatawa, Tecumseh, and their followers continued to deteriorate. In November 1811, Governor Harrison led an attack on Tenskwatawa's settlement at Tippecanoe, plundering the settlement in the aftermath and leading to even more resentment towards the Americans. Word of the battle reached Chicago over the next several months, but no official reports, causing confusion and concern among the residents. In April 1812, there was an attack at Lee's Farm, the cattle ranch along the south branch of the river. 2 men were killed by a band of Winnebago warriors, and all residents around Chicago were on high alert afterwards, with Captain Heald suspending all interactions with the Native Americans, which prohibited Irwin from doing his job and trading at the factory. For Irwin, this was just yet another event causing a rift between 2 factions at the site. On one side was Irwin and Lalim, and on the other side Kinsey and his friends, including, at least in Irwin's eyes, Captain Heald. Irwin frequently wrote letters to the Secretary of War in Washington with his concerns about Kinsey's British ties and corrupt business practices, and just days after the attack at Lee's Farm, he wrote about the attack, saying that he had been working hard to prevent the escalation that could lead to a war by dissuading Kinsey's group from responding to the attacks by murdering the Winnebago warriors. In addition, he wrote about how the closure of the factory by Heald benefited Kinsey, who was still operating his trading post. So you can see the tensions were increasing within the settlement, and ultimately things came to a head on June 17th, when the 2 factions argued, beginning inside the fort before going outside the fort, with Kinsey leaving the fight with a gunshot to the shoulder, and Lalim stabbed to death. In the aftermath, Kinsey fled across the river, and Heald ordered Irwin to chase after him alone. Irwin refused out of fear for his own safety, so Heald ordered him to leave the fort. Irwin locked himself in the factory for 6 days after the event, during which time Kinsey made his way to Milwaukee, where he met with pro-British Native Americans before sneaking back south to Peoria. In Chicago, tensions continued to rise, and Irwin's letter to the Secretary of War about the murder was brushed aside, while the Secretary focused on the beginning of the War of 1812 with the British. Eventually, Heald sent word to Kinsey that he needed to return to Chicago, and Irwin left for Fort Mackinac in early July to hire a new interpreter to replace Lalim. Unfortunately for Irwin, the British captured him a few weeks later when they attacked Fort Mackinac, though perhaps that was a fortunate event for him, since he was then kept safe from Kinsey's wrath. After the attack at Fort Mackinac, Captain Heald was ordered to evacuate Fort Dearborn and destroy all firearms and ammunition at the garrison, but deliver all remaining provisions to the friendly Native Americans for assistance. And William Wells was sent with a contingent of 30 friendly Miami Native Americans to escort the people leaving Fort Dearborn. Wells arrived on August 12th, and on August 14th, Heald informed the Potawatomi leaders that they would be abandoning the fort. The Potawatomi were then under the impression that Heald would be distributing the remaining supplies to them in exchange for their escort, which was part of the order Heald was under, but Heald instead ordered that all supplies be destroyed. Later that night, Potawatomi men witnessed the gunpowder and liquor being dumped into the river. In the morning of August 15th, Heald led a group of 54 U.S. regulars, 12 militia, 9 women, and 18 children, south along the lake, intending to march to Fort Wayne. Wells led the group with his Miami team split between the front of the group and the rear. About a mile and a half into the march, Heald discovered a group of Potawatomi whom he believed were going to ambush them, and ordered his men to climb a sand dune, fire at the Potawatomi, and charge them. Only 15 minutes later, Wells and 26 of the U.S. regulars, all of the militia, 2 women, and 12 children were dead, along with 15 Potawatomi. The rest were taken capture, and the Potawatomi burned down the fort. As for the Miamis, it is not clear on which side they fought, with survivors' accounts split on the subject. But that was enough for Governor Harrison, who used the battle as a pretext to attack Miami villages, which in turn led the Miamis to side with the British for the remainder of the War of 1812. If you've liked this video, please leave a comment or consider becoming a Patreon supporter. With your support, I hope the project will end up being great. Also, Be sure to click to watch the video on the screen now. I'm sure you'll enjoy it too.